All right, let's just jump right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive and frankly super intense debate that's currently unfolding across Alberta's healthcare sector. We're looking at the ripple effect of a newly introduced piece of legislation called Bill 212. Whether you're totally embedded in healthcare policy or, you're just someone who occasionally fills a prescription at your local pharmacy, the implications here are absolutely fascinating. So let's get right to it. On the surface, we have to ask a question that might sound almost a little silly at first. Are pharmacy reward points a harmless consumer perk, or are they a threat to patient care? I mean, most of us absolutely love loyalty points, right? They feel like free money, a nice little bonus for doing our grocery shopping or picking up our meds. But as we dig into the source material today, we're going to see a really stark contrast. We'll explore exactly why pharmacy advocates are raising severe clinical concerns, arguing that what looks like a totally harmless retail perk to us consumers is actually fundamentally altering the foundation of patient care. So here's our roadmap for the Explainer. We'll introduce Bill 212, run through the history of inducements, dive into the economics of points, compare corporate versus independent pharmacies, look closely at the 2026 crisis, and then finally wrap up with the advocacy blueprint. Starting right off with Section 1, introducing Bill 221, and how it is reopening the door. So, the catalyst for this entire debate happened on May 13th, 2026. That's when MLA Angela Pitt introduced Bill 212, which is officially titled the Rewards Points Amendment Act. And get this, it passed its first reading that very same afternoon. The reason this specific date and this specific bill are sparking such a massive reaction is because, well, according to critics and pharmacy advocates, this legislation threatens to essentially erase a whole decade of regulatory protections. It reopens the door to prescription loyalty programs, often called inducements in the industry, which were explicitly banned in the province years ago. To really understand why this is such a major flashpoint, we need to look at Section 2, the history of inducements, and why advocates insist this is a clinical issue, not a commercial one. Context is literally everything here. Prior to 2014, pharmacies in Alberta could actually offer points on prescriptions. This led to an era commonly known as multiplier days. But because of the clinical issues that started popping up during that time, the Alberta College of Pharmacy, or the ACP, enacted a strict ban on these inducements in 2014. And this really brilliantly illustrates the professional consensus at the time. A full 75% of Alberta pharmacy professionals actually supported banning these rewards. Fast forward a bit to 2017, and the Alberta Court of Appeal upheld this ban, confirming it as a necessary structural protection for healthcare ethics. And that timeline brings us right up to May 13th, 2026, where Bill 212 is threatening to just reset the clock straight back to that pre-2014 era. Okay, so what exactly was that pre-2014 reality actually like? The source material highlights two pretty shocking historical anecdotes that really anchor why advocates are so incredibly concerned today. First off, multiplier day chaos. Large national chains used to run massive, say 10x points, events on the first Tuesday of the month. Patients would intentionally delay filling essential life-sustaining medications just to cash in on those points. As you can imagine, this created unbelievably unsafe operational surges and massive staffing strain on those specific days. Secondly, there was something called the vacation loophole. Senior pharmacists recall patients coming in to refill thousands of dollars worth of high-cost specialty medications. These patients would openly admit they didn't even need the drug anymore. But because their insurance fully covered the cost, they just kept the refills going to fund their annual family vacations with the points. It's kind of wild, right? And this brings us to a super powerful quote from Greg Eberhardt, the former registrar of the Alberta College of Pharmacy. He noted, "A decision by a pharmacist might include not providing a drug. That might be the best decision." When you start introducing retail metrics and loyalty points into healthcare, you effectively demify patient care. Critics of Bill 212 argue that point systems fundamentally compromise a pharmacist's ethical duty to occasionally look a patient in the eye and say no, simply because the financial incentive for the patient is screaming yes. Let's shift gears to Section 3 and see how this all builds into the economics of points. Who pays and who benefits? Just look at the sheer economic asymmetry of these loyalty programs on the screen here. Consider the financial burden versus the reward. On one side, the payer, which is usually a public drug program, a private insurer, or an employer plan, is covering 80 to 100% of the actual cost of the medication, but they receive literally 0% of the loyalty reward. On the flip side, the beneficiary, the patient, might pay absolutely nothing out of pocket, but they receive 100% of the retail reward. Advocates are pointing out that this is an incredibly distorted market. Their core argument is that incentives should follow the money. If a plan is paying for the drug, any rebate or reward should funnel back to the plan to lower overall healthcare premiums for everybody, rather than just acting as a subsidized retail perk for the individual. And because of that massive shift in value, the source material brings up a very specific and frankly fascinating counter-argument from pharmacy advocates. They argue that if Bill 212 actually passes and this point system returns, these prescription rewards should be treated as taxable income. Yeah, they're seriously suggesting patients should receive T4 tax slips for the thousands of dollars in value they're accumulating. It really shows you just how strongly advocates feel about this economic distortion. To them, it's not just a free cup of coffee. It's a massive, untaxed transfer of wealth that's being subsidized by healthcare payers. Moving right along into Section 4, Corporate versus Independent and the Workplace Divide. Let's look at how these economics play out totally differently depending on where a pharmacist actually works. There's a really stark dichotomy in how this affects different businesses. On one side, you have independent community pharmacies. They operate on incredibly tight dispensing margins, usually hovering around 2 to 4%. Their entire business model is focused on clinical, patient-centered outcomes. On the other side, you've got the massive big box retailers and grocery chains. According to the source, these corporate giants engage in volume wars, where they can easily subsidize the cost of aggressive points programs by using their non-pharmacy front store revenue. You know, selling groceries, cosmetics, electronics, the whole shebang. Advocates argue that independent pharmacies simply cannot financially compete in a points war against a multi-billion-dollar grocery chain. And what actually happens when a sector is dominated by volume-driven corporate points models? Well, the source provides an alarming statistic from a 2024 Ontario College of Pharmacists report titled Under Stress and Duress. Over 80% of pharmacists working at corporate chains reported extreme workplace pressures. We're talking rigid corporate quotas and super tight time targets just for billing clinical services. Compare that to the same report noting that only 18% of independent pharmacists felt those kinds of severe corporate pressures. It perfectly illustrates how tying retail metrics to healthcare can profoundly impact workplace integrity and the daily reality of the professionals dispensing your medication. Now, stacking right on top of that workplace pressure, the tension comes right back to Alberta today. 82% of surveyed Alberta pharmacists are currently reporting serious viability concerns or tightening margins under a brand new June 2026 funding framework. So you have a profession that is already feeling intense financial and operational strain locally, which brings us directly into Section 5, the 2026 crisis, and what the source is calling a double blow. Critics of Bill 221 argue that this legislation is hitting at literally the worst possible moment. Reopening the inducement door right now acts as a double blow, completely compounding that unresolved financial crisis we just looked at. The real fear outlined in the source is that weaponizing these existing financial instabilities is going to drive aggressive market consolidation. If the independents can't afford to give away points, patients naturally migrate to the big box stores. Independent community pharmacies are forced to close their doors, and the whole market becomes dominated by a few massive corporate players. So, how is the profession actually responding to all this? Let's check out Section 6, the Advocacy Blueprint. What's really fascinating about the source material today is that it isn't just a dry policy essay, it's a fully mobilized call to action for pharmacy professionals. They've laid out a highly specific 3-step blueprint. Step 1 is ACT. Professionals are instructed to share this clinical, data-driven breakdown directly within their local pharmacy group chats and networks. Step 2 is advocate. They are urging their peers to contact their local MLA or MLA Angela Pitt's office to demand that healthcare choices be driven by patient safety, not retail gimmicks. And finally, Step 3 is evaluate. They are actively directing professionals to download and read the official Hansard transcript from the May 14, 2026 Assembly session so they can see exactly what is being debated on the floor. It is a highly organized, peer-to-peer strategic response. As we near the end of our explainer, there's this quote from the source that just beautifully summarizes the core argument of the pharmacy advocates. The 2017 Court of Appeal didn't uphold the inducement ban to limit consumer choice. It upheld it to protect clinical judgment. Bill 212 puts that protection at risk. It strips away all the abstract legalese and brings it right back down to the pharmacist standing behind the counter. For them, this isn't about denying you a perk. It's about making sure their ability to make the absolutely right clinical decision for your health isn't clouded by some corporate rewards quota. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question posed by the source material. Do we want an autonomous healthcare profession that practices independently and clinically? Or are we genuinely okay with a consolidated retail sector where pharmacy is simply treated as a loss leader just to fund corporate points programs? It really forces you to ponder the true hidden costs of consumer loyalty programs in the healthcare space. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpacked the data and the arguments surrounding Bill 212. It's a super complex issue for sure, but understanding these different perspectives is the first step to seeing the bigger picture. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.